Hello friends, welcome back to our channel Demystify Frontend, and this is going to be yet another exciting video in the series Build Your Own Angular Forms. So this is not a regular series where I'll teach you how you can make use of Angular Forms to manage your form handling scenarios like two-way data binding or validation. Rather, we are creating Angular Form from the scratch. Yes, we are building Angular Form package from the scratch. And you all know, when you build something from scratch, the learning is at another level because you will deep dive in all those areas which you might not have touched ever before. Just check out the playlist and you will get to know how far we have come and how we have progressed so far. Coming back to the point, what you are going to learn in this video. So basically, I'll try to point out one very common issue which every Angular developer must have faced while working on Angular forms. I can say how you can optimize your Angular form validations. Now, many times you must have observed this thing like when you have some input field and you have some validations on that input field. Angular default behavior is like that when you start typing something, it will validate your data and it will update the form control, which is behind the scenes tracking all the values and the validity of your form element. So on each keystroke, this validation will run and it will update the all the status flags on the form control. So now you can see there are two error messages shown here. Provide the first name and give at least 3 characters. Now as soon as I type, it will validate and it will satisfy the validations accordingly. Now all my validations are passed and you see we fired the last validation, that is a async validation, and we saw the message as per the input. But you will see this is happening on every keystroke. As far as the synchronous validations are concerned, it's fine. But if I talk about the async validation, which might require making an API call or doing some heavy async operations, so that is not very well for your application health, right? Because on every keystroke you are initiating an API call to validate your data. So how can you fix it? So one way to fix it is if we can delay validation check on blur of this input or on submit of this form, that will solve our issue of not validating the input on each keystroke or on change of the input field. Rather, we validate it once we leave the input or we submit the form. So if I take you to the Angular dev ngModel documentation, you will see ngModel accept one property here by the name ngModel options. And if you have a look over there, you will see it accept one key update on. And what update on says? So update on defines an event upon which the form control value and validity update, and by default it take its value as change, right? So using this property we can modify the behavior of ngModel to validate our data on the blur event or on the submit event. But since, as I mentioned earlier, we are not using the Angular form package, we are creating our own Angular package which mimics exactly the same original Angular package. Yes. So we will implement this same functionality in our ngModel implementations. So let's implement the support for ngModel options now. So for that, first we will have to accept one more input property, ngModel options. So let's define the type of this ngModel options input property, and this is going to be something like um, a set of key value pairs. So we are not going to define all the properties of ngModel options, rather we are more interested in this update on. Okay, so this will accept one prop update on having type form hook. Okay, form hooks. All right, so what is this form hooks and where should we define it? So we will define this type in our abstract control. Let's move to the abstract control and define here. It's going to be one of the literal I define here, like change or blur or submit. So submit is something we will implement later. So for now, let's keep it change or blur. And we can also keep a copy of the update on flag from the ngModel options here on abstract control. I'll name it update on, and that is again going to be of type form hooks. And we can give a default value to the update on property through this getter. If this is defined, then we can return it as it is. Otherwise we will fall back to the change. Alright, now get back to the ngModel. Let's import it in the ngModel, and we will make this field as optional, right? So this is optional, you can pass or you can leave it. And the next question is how ngModel gets to know about if this input is blurred and we need to validate this input. So for that I'll take you back to the concept of control value accessors. If you closely observe within this ng onChange callback, so ngModel does some initial setup for the very first time, and that is setting up the form control and setting up a view change pipeline. So in this view change pipeline, you can see we are registering on something, like registering for some change here on this value accessor. So what this value accessor is, so this is nothing, this is our control value accessor directives. And if you have following this series on the start, must have got a solid understanding of the control value accessor concept. But I need to give a quick refresher on this because this is very much needed to proceed from here. So basically if you see this value accessor, so there is a DI token which ngModel inject, and through this DI injection it get access to the control value accessor. And on the control value accessor we register for the change events and we pass a callback. So basically that control value accessor will invoke this callback, pass it the updated value, and that's how we get the most updated value from the input within this callback, which we can ultimately pass back to the use case component where we have this ngModel applied on the input, and we can also update that value on our form control, which ultimately update the value and validity flags on the form controls. But if the user has provided a different update strategy on the form control like blur, so for that we also need to have another sort of subscription where we can subscribe for the blur event, and for that we will need to go through the control value accessor and make some changes. Let me take you through the control value accessor slides which we recorded in the previous videos. So don't get overwhelmed, I'll just make it clear within the next 2 minutes. So this is your ngModel directive which we have applied on this input field. I have taken a dummy input field here, and you're passing some input property to the ngModel. So what the ngModel basically does, so it provides the two-way data binding, so validate your data. So ngModel will take that input and it will pass it to the control value accessor. So ngModel could have injected the host element as well. It could have returned that input property to the underlying host element directly, and it could have also listened for the appropriate events from the host element and update the form control. But that approach won't scale very well for different type of inputs, because for different type of inputs you need to subscribe to different type of events, and you also write to them in different ways. Like for the inputs you write to the value attribute, but for the checkbox you are going to write to the checked property. So taking all these complexities in reading and writing to the different host elements into the consideration, Angular splits this responsibility to different set of directives, and these directives are nothing, these are collectively called control value accessor directives. So they have some selectors using which they apply on a particular form element where you have your ngModel already applied, and they offload the ngModel from this task of reading and writing to the host element. And also ngModel have a clean interface to read and write to the different host element through these directives, as these directives also implement a control value accessor interface. So in this case we have the normal input, so this default control value accessor instance is applied, and ngModel can simply read and write the values from here. To write something to the host element, it can directly call the write value on the injected control value accessor, Similarly, to read or to get updates from the host element side, it can register for the change events, and it can pass that value back to the use case component. So you can see how the control value accessor directives simplified the operations of ngModel. And similarly, if you apply the ngModel on a checkbox, in that case, this checkbox control value accessor directive gets applied, and it help the ngModel reading and writing onto the checkbox. Now coming back to the code, so far our control value accessor directives are supporting the change events, but we also need the blur event so that we can update our form controls on the blur events as well if the user has provided the update strategy as blur. So for that, I'll go back to the control value accessor and I'll implement one more method here. So now this is the method which every control value accessor has to implement now. So this is the base class which every control value accessor extend. Okay, so we can have this method similar to the register on change, which will accept a callback and attach it to the on blur event in every control value accessor directive. And I'll also implement one more property here on touched, and this is going to be a simple function. So, we pass a callback to the register on touched. This is not accepting any parameter, and we can simply assign this callback to the on touched. And now let's visit each of the control value accessors which we have created so far and register for the blur event. And we can register this on touched callback on that blur event in each of the control value accessor directives. So let's start with the default value accessor. So I have already copied a shorthand to register for the events. So instead of host listener, we can have this shorthand also in the directive configuration. So this will register for the blur event on this directive, and it will invoke this on touched callback, right? And you know this callback is coming from the base class, as all our control value accessor directives extend the base class. And in the base class we have already provided a mechanism to register for the blur events, right? So from the ngModel we will call this register on change. We will pass the callback function which it captures in the on touch property, and it will wire this callback to the on blur event. Let's repeat the same thing in rest of the directives. So let's go to the checkbox control value accessor, select control value accessor, and let's copy this, and let's do it for the multi select also. All right, so let's see if we have any errors. Yes, so we are getting something here. Let's check it out first. Okay, so if you see, we have a counter component which is a custom form element, and it implements the control value accessor. So we will have to define this newly created method register on change over there as well. So let's go there in the counter component. So all you have to do, just implement that additional method which we have defined, and we can leave it empty. Okay, everything seems to be fine now. Now we can easily register for the touch events on the underlying host elements like we did earlier for the change events using register on change. So I'll simply copy this method here, and I'll paste it here, and I'll rename it to setup blur pipeline, right? And I'll call the method which we just created register on touched, and here we don't expect any value, so I'll keep it empty, and also I'll remove this line and I'll comment it out. We need to call this, so we will call it here right after the view change pipeline. Now since we have this update strategy, so we should set up the update strategy on the form control. Okay, so we do all the things on the form control in this method setup form control, where you can see we have set up some validations which ngModel inject from outside. So first we will make a check here if user has provided this update on flag provided on the form control as well. So we should put a check here. If we have the update strategy has changed, only then we will emit the updated value back to the use case component, and we will update the form control, which will run the validation ultimately. We need to capture what the user has been entering in the input. For that, we need to define some temporary variables on the form control, where we can capture all the updates through this callback. Let's go to the form control and define two such variables. Okay, so let's get back to the ngModel. Instead of assigning the value directly to the form control, we can assign it to the pending value, and we can mark this flag pending on change as true. Okay, so now we are capturing all the value coming from the input here within our on change callback, which we registered through this register on change on the injected control value accessor, but we have not updated it yet. uh, if the update strategy, if the form control update strategy is blur, so we can make use of these variables, and we can place a check here within this on blur callback, like if the control update strategy is blur, there are some changes which are pending, then we can simply read the pending updates through this key and update it on the form control, which will ultimately run all the validations on the new updated value and will update all those validation flags. And we also need to copy this line update emit true. So this is our ngModel change event that will emit the updated value back to the use case component. So just copy the pending value and pass it through this event. All right, so we can pass the ngModel options here, and within the option let's provide this update strategy through this key update on, and which can be something like either of these, blur or on change. So change is default, so we update it from change to blur. And now let's see if how it is working. Okay, so you can see if I'm changing something, there is no validation error message shown here. But what if I blur from here, if I lose a focus from the input, what happens? Oh great, that's great, now it is working fine. And again, if I satisfy these two validations, so let me check if it fires the async validation immediately. So let's say Tom. So Tom is an invalid name. So you can see there are no validations firing here because the form control value is still not updated. But as soon as we blur from this input, as soon as we focus out of this input, these validations, the value will be updated on the form control, and all the validations will be updated. Now you can see it is running the async validation. Okay, now let me give it another name. How we accommodate the ngModel options in our ngModel directive implementation, which can modify the way ngModel validate your inputs. So this way, if you have some async validation, you can update the form control update strategy from change to. This way you can reduce the number of API calls you were making earlier while validating your input fields. So that's all from my side, and I need your feedback to continue this series. So please write in the comments if you learned something new. Until then, let's see you in the next video. Until then, take care. Goodbye.